Good afternoon, everybody. If you'd like to walk over this way to the stage or make your way over, we're going to start our speaking program. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming out to Boston City Hall Plaza today to celebrate the 27th anniversary of the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'm Kristen McCosh, the Disability Commissioner and ADA Title II Coordinator for the City of Boston. I'm really happy to see such a great turnout today when it would have been really easy to skip an outdoor event. As most of you know, the ADA is a civil rights law for people with disabilities. It protects them from discrimination in many aspects of life, including housing, employment, and transportation. In Boston, we've always been a leader in anti-discrimination, but we are also very proactive as a city in embracing new policies that promote equity for all of our residents. This is especially true when it comes to housing. This year, we have two groups that we'd like to recognize for their contributions to improving housing for people with disabilities. First, the Boston Planning and Development Agency, or BPDA. The BPDA has done a lot of work with my commission, including adopting policies that require developers to go beyond the minimum accessibility requirements in new projects. To talk about this work, I'd like to introduce Tim Davis from the BPDA, to talk about all our work. Tim?
Thank you. I'm Tim Davis. I'm the Housing Policy Manager at the Boston Planning and Development Agency. Up until a little bit less than a year ago, we were known as the Boston Redevelopment Authority. So our new name is a reflection of the work that we're doing around planning as a priority and development as the other feature of our organization. I'd first like to apologize that Director Brian Golden cannot be with us today. He is an active officer in the military reserves, and this is the time of year that he is performing his service to our country instead of just to the city of Boston. So on behalf of Director Golden, Executive Secretary Teresa Polimas, and the BPDA Board, and all the BPDA staff, we are honored to receive recognition for our efforts to improve the lives of those with disabilities. There are a number of places where the Boston Planning and Development Agency plays an important role in improving accessibility throughout the city of Boston. In our planning efforts, we work with the Boston Transportation Department to implement the Complete Streets program, which creates a streetscape that is more accessible and friendly for many kinds of users and forms of mobility. In our development review efforts, the BPDA in 2014 adopted accessibility guidelines and an accessibility checklist, which was revised again in March of this year. The guidelines and checklists have allowed the Boston Planning and Development Agency to examine the accessibility of a new development, of any projects undergoing review, and encourage ideal design for accessibility that at a minimum meet or ideally exceed the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Massachusetts Architectural Access Compliancy requirements. To support the inclusion of persons with disabilities, the guidelines and checklists require preliminary project details that are intended to ensure all individuals have an equal experience that includes the fullest participation in the built environment throughout the proposed buildings and open space. Access plans include sustainability provisions for people aging in place as applicable. This review applies to all projects that come before us, whether they're small or large projects, but also for our city's large institutions, including hospitals and universities. They must also complete this checklist and provide necessary responses. Through this process, we are able to increase accessibility for residents and users of Boston's buildings, but also to increase accessibility around these buildings for all residents. Our agency's efforts do not stop the review process, however. Through the inclusionary development policy, which is my major focus, private developers have completed almost 2,000 units of income-restricted housing for moderate to middle-income families throughout the city without the support of public subsidies. In addition, private developers have made contributions to a housing fund that has supported the completion of over 1,000 additional income-restricted units affordable to low and moderate-income families. Before now, while some of the units provided under this program have been built out as accessible to someone with a mobility or sensory need, there has been no official requirement. Over the last year, I have worked with developers to provide more of these units, but as we've announced last week at the Disability Housing Task Force, the BPDA staff, we are recommending to our board at their next vote to adopt a new policy which would require that in projects where fully accessible units are required by law, that 15% of the income-restricted units must also be accessible. This new policy does not increase the cost to developers, but does assure that where such units exist, moderate to middle-income households with such a need have a better chance of finding a place to live and stay in Boston. We all know that new construction provides the best opportunity for people with disabilities to get a unit that meets their needs. And the challenges that you have in finding such a unit amongst our city full of triple-deckers and row houses. Our sister agency, the Department of Neighborhood Development, also is increasing their requirements. They currently require that 5% of units that they fund in their affordable housing programs are accessible. They're doubling that commitment to 10%. Finally, also in our agency, our housing compliance unit also recognizes the specific needs of those with disabilities. As a result, our staff are working more closely with the Disability Commission staff to identify places where more flexibility is needed on our asset and income policies. For example, our staff are now treating special needs trusts differently than other forms of assets. In addition, the Disability Commission is agreeing to work with our staff to work together more to review disability preference documentation so as to make sure that ADA units we monitor are paired with people who need that specific build-out. Again, it is our pleasure to be here with you today. We at the Boston Planning and Development Agency will continue to work with the Disabilities Commission to make Boston's built environment the most inclusive environment for all of Boston's residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. And in addition to the BPDA, there are a number of other groups that we've worked with very closely for many years, as long as I've been here with the city. And I'd just like to make sure that I recognize them. The Fair Housing and Equity Commission, Inspectional Services, Public Works Department, Public Improvement Commission, Boston Transportation Department, the Elderly Commission, Elections, and certainly the Health and Human Services departments, which I am a part of the Health and Human Services Cabinet. We all work together, along with many other departments in the city and the state, to improve accessibility policies for the entire city. So the other group that we're recognizing today for all of their hard work and commitment is the Disability Housing Task Force. This task force was put together by Chief Dillon and myself to look at the policies laid out in Housing Boston 2030. We specifically wanted to look at the population of people with disabilities who are not elderly. These are young people, individuals, families who may not fit into the categorical requirements of elderly housing but still need accessible housing. So in that vein, I would like to introduce one of the members of the Disability Housing Task Force, Olivia Richard, to talk about her work and her commitment to gaining more accessible housing for people with disabilities. Let's welcome Olivia.
Thank you, Commissioner. My name is Olivia Richard, and I live in the Brighton neighborhood of Boston. I'm a member of the Boston Center for Independent Living and a disability rights activist who has a special focus on housing and healthcare. I was lucky enough to be a part of the Boston Disability Housing Task Force. The number one factor in what we call the social determinants of health, which is just a fancy term for what parts in people's lives affect their health, is having safe, stable, affordable, accessible, integrated housing. We with disabilities are twice as likely as our non-disabled peers to be homeless, and that's often defined by sleeping rough, as most of our homeless shelters aren't accessible to people with disabilities. People are on the street. We are likely to be institutionalized in nursing homes and other facilities that are darn near impossible to transition out of without help. The rising rents, gentrification, and cuts to housing and community-based support programs at the state and federal level mean this problem for Bostonians with disabilities is getting more difficult, not better. Boston is a city that has an exceptionally strong moral compass and a drive to help improve the lives of its residents, whomever they may be. We have led the pack on standing with immigrants, have a positive relationship between our police department and the community, and even have non-gendered accessible bathrooms in our city hall. It's a sign of our integrity as a city that when the housing situation nationwide is getting harder, we're rolling out new policies and regulations at all levels of housing development that improve access to affordable integrated housing that's accessible to Bostonians with disabilities. Things such as making sure that a good percentage of the accessible housing is also affordable when a new building goes up. Making the information about what accessible housing is actually out there up to date and easy to search for when people are looking for a place to live. And setting up written guides for Bostonians with disabilities on what's available for community resources to support them to ensure they can keep living where they are if their needs change are progressive steps to improve the lives of everyone in this city. For me, the fight is personal. I've experienced homelessness. I've experienced living in a nursing home, and I've experienced living in an apartment that wasn't accessible to my needs. I fight to make sure the mistakes, absurdities, and negative situations I was in won't happen to another person. This came to mind when I was recently hospitalized for a serious infection. It hit me that what was getting me through the pain, frustration, boredom, and string of unpleasant procedures was knowing that once the doctors finished doing what they needed to do, I could go home. That I have a safe, comfortable apartment that meets my needs, and that I can afford a place that won't be yanked out from under me at any second for factors out of my control. And that's what every person deserves, and I will keep fighting for. Dignified, safe, until everyone can know this peace and security of having a place to call home that's dignified, safe, affordable, accessible, and integrated into the community of their choosing. The fact that my vision is a shared vision is what makes my city of Boston a wicked awesome place to call home. Thank you.
I don't know if I could top that, but Olivia is one of our strongest advocates, and she worked for almost 2 years on the task force, along with many other people who are here today. So I'd like to ask anyone who is a member of the task force to begin to make their way up towards the stage. We're going to do a group picture, and we just want to do a thank you too. Before we get to that, I would like to next introduce my boss, the Chief of Health and Human Services for the City of Boston, Felix Arroyo, who has always been a tireless advocate for the rights of people with disabilities during his time as a city councilor, and certainly during his time here as the Chief of Health and Human Services. Felix really embodies the mayor's vision of a city that provides equity to all of its residents. And sometimes people with disabilities get left out of the equity definition, but not with Chief Arroyo. He has a history of this. I know his family, his father was always a strong advocate when he was with the city. And Felix Jr. continues to be that advocate, and I am very proud to be chosen to represent the Disability Commission and to be part of the Health and Human Services Cabinet, whose all of our departments really work towards increasing equity every day. on the job and off the job. So with that, I'd like to introduce Chief Arroyo.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. First, let me just give a shout out to Kristen and just say that that person she introduced is awesome, and I really can't wait to meet him. I want to say that Kristen was the commissioner of the Disabilities Commission prior to my being appointed Chief of Human Services and prior to Mayor Walsh being elected mayor. And it was a no-brainer. It literally didn't take seconds for us to know that we wanted Kristen to stay and to continue serving that role. And we're just very grateful that she decided to do so, and we're very grateful for the work that she does. And Kristen, I just want to thank you for not only continuing in the role, but doing it the way that you do and making sure that the voices of those with disabilities are heard and beyond heard, but their needs are acted upon, and I want to thank you for that. There's one thing Chris and I talk about an awful lot, and that is that at various times, you know, we are representing either the department or the cabinet, so therefore we get to be behind the microphone. But we know that we're only as good as our team, and I just want to give a shout out to the entire Disabilities Commission team. If you're here, if you could raise your hand if you're either working with them or volunteering with them. This day, but also everything they do doesn't happen without them. It's a small team, but if you're in a fist fight, you want them with you. They're a real scrappy bunch. And then forgive me if I forget anyone, but I certainly see some other departments from HHS represented here today. And I see Janina Salata from the Office of Fair Housing and Equity is with us. Catalina is here from the Office of Food Access, and I see Robert, who's here from the Veteran Services. I really appreciate you being here today. I have the honor of giving a proclamation to the Boston Planning and Department Agency, which was formerly known as the BRA. Let me tell you something. For a big, fat, progressive liberal from Jamaica Plain, I don't think I ever thought I'd be giving a proclamation to the BRA.
Thank you.
However, there's a rule that I have with my team, and I tell them all the time, I don't really want credit for the work I don't do, but I certainly don't mind it for the work I do. And when it comes to these issues, the BPDA has really led the way and has made Boston a better place for those living with disabilities. And so allow me now to read this proclamation out. Let's say to the Boston Planning, whereas the Boston Planning Development Agency, formerly known as the BRA, was reestablished as the BPDA by Mayor Walsh in 2016 with a new focus on comprehensive planning, community outreach, and inclusive growth. Whereas the Boston Planning Development Agency uses a future-focused, city-wide lens to engage residents, establish partnerships, implement solutions that meet dynamic needs of individuals and families in the 21st century. Whereas the BPDA has pledged to support projects that reflect the types of development Bostonians want in neighborhoods rather than prioritizing proposals from developers that don't meet community needs. Whereas the BPDA has shown a good faith effort in collaborating with other city departments and groups such as the Disability Housing Task Force to create new policies that increase access to housing for people with disabilities. The BPDA has demonstrated strong, effective leadership in the changing building environment by approving Article 80 accessibility checklists to ensure that all new developments in Boston go beyond, listen carefully, that all new developments in Boston go beyond the minimum accessibility requirements. The BPDA is committed to shaping a future of Boston together with the disability community and creating opportunities for people of all abilities to live, work, and thrive in the city we love. Therefore, Martin J. Walsh, Mayor of the City of Boston, hereby proclaims July 25th, BPDA and Disability Housing Task Force Accessibility Day here in the City of Boston. Thank you.
So we have a few members of the Housing Task Force up on the stage with us. I see Barbara Chandler for MBHP and Janice Ward, who is a community advocate. So we're going to take a few pictures with them after we close our remarks. But in closing, I do just want to, again, give the most thanks to Mayor Walsh, because it's really his vision that guides us and his support that lets us do the work that he hired us to do. And without that vision and support, none of this would be possible. So let's give a round of applause for Mayor Walsh. So in closing, I would like to thank everybody for coming out today. I'd also like to thank Spalding and Partners Hospitals who gave us funding to produce the Housing Resources Guide that we are distributing now to help people navigate the different resources available to find housing. Anyone else who I missed in thanking, I apologize, but like I said, the main people who always work with us and support us, I think that we got everybody, but also I would like to give personal thanks to my staff, my advisory board, and my volunteers, who I could not do this work without them, so thank you all again. And thank you to the community who continue to advocate for the rights of people with disabilities. The ADA is 27 years old now, but we still need to keep fighting to make sure that the promises of the ADA are fulfilled, especially in the political climate that we have today. So keep on advocating and keep in touch with me, because your voice really guides my vision of my work as well. So again, enjoy the rest of the day. There's information under the tents. We have food, if there's any left. We have hoodsies from the Boston Police Department. And we look forward to seeing you again next year. Happy ADA Day 2017.